Hey, welcome everyone. Um, I'm going to get going. So again, I'm Karen Filipovich. I'm facilitating. This is the Gallatin Water Collaborative monthly update. Thank you so much for coming. Our theme is thinking about the Montana legislative session and water as pertains to all of us and the Gallatin watershed. Thanks again. See so many folks putting your names in chat. Really appreciate it. Okay, thank you. And Holly, thanks so much. We also put in the agenda for today. Folks, I know most, if not all of you have it. If for some reason you're not getting things directly, if you could contact either Holly Hill or Ben, we'll get you on the list. We're going to start with some on the radar stuff. We've got quite a few things going on, but we decided in lieu of kind of doing what we often do, a little more discussion, we really wanted to have some time to hear our perspectives from our legislative folks and some time for discussion. So we were going to start with some kind of on our radar, see if there were anything else. These are brief things. Again, if you have events, please email Holly. We've got the calendar. We can also use the Gaggle listserv to get information out. So just reminders on all of that. And then something we're not going to spend time today on, but I know it's been a weird day with the federal funding freeze, pause, whatever it's being called this hour. We are aware that it is affecting some of the folks on this call, and nobody knows what's happening with that. So we're going to keep monitoring that. If you guys have ideas or things that your organization is doing, reach out to us afterwards, but we're really going to focus on Montana today. I just really want to acknowledge that that has been a strange day in a lot of ways for a lot of folks.
Karen, I just wanted to add to that I'm just sort of proud of this network that we've developed and hoping that people can sort of, as we're trying to figure things out with this, the federal situation, we have each other. So encouraged by you all showing up and yeah, I think that there's a lot of great relationship building we've been working on to reach out to each other and use each other as resources. So.
Yeah, thank you. So again, we'll follow up as needed with folks as you see it. But in the meantime, I'd like to turn over. We've got a little list of things we know are coming up around the region that we wanted to put on folks' radar. And then see if there were any other quick things. And again, if you've got an event coming up soon, we invite you to put that link in the chat as well as the other things I did. Okay. So where should we start with that list? Catherine, you want to start with a couple of those things and we'll go through? I know that's not the exact order, but.
Yeah, that's perfect. So a couple things on our radar section. First, we have the Gallatin County Health Code. They're updating Chapter 3, which has to do with individual septic systems. And we're looking at a few of the updates that are requiring newer or expanded systems to upgrade to level 2 treatment. So higher treatment of nitrogen, better for groundwater, better for water quality. So looking at some of those. And if you the Environmental Health Subcommittee is showing that draft to the Board of Health on February 20th. So they'll accept public comment up till then. But if you get your public comment in early by February 1st, they can include that in the draft. So just something to keep in mind, February 1st included in the draft. February 20th will just go to the Board of Health and will be considered when they're looking at the draft. Let's see what else is on my piece. Ashley, I might cold call you. I wasn't at the meeting this morning for county subdivision regulations, but right now the county has either adopted new subdivision regulations or is in the process of, okay.
I believe they were adopted this morning.
Awesome. Well, so the county just updated their, or amended some of their subdivision regulations to comply with the 2021-2023 legislative sessions, and then the county's updated 2021 growth policy. And one of the big updates to that was some language that include proposed changes for including requirements to retain native vegetation within watercourse setbacks, which is great.
Wonderful. Yeah, and we'll have some more follow-ups on those soon, I think. Yeah, that's some good news that those were adopted. Anything else, Catherine, before I go on to Gallatin Science Day?
The county is also scoping for potential zoning reform options. So there will be public meetings beginning in mid-February. So the dates are February 18th, March 13th, and March 25th. Those will be on the collaborative calendar. And then in terms of the city did their first round of public engagement for the Unified Development Code update. And right now we're working to look at all of that public comment. They're continuing to reach out to the community, and they're looking to have a draft by the end of the spring or in early summer. So look out for opportunities to engage there. And then we have heard that the city of Bozeman will also pick back up their wetland code update for engagement opportunities in February. So also stay on the lookout for that one.
Great, thank you. I think we've hit most of them. And Adam, Adam Sigler, I don't know if you can unmute, but we were hoping you could tell us the date and just maybe a one-sentence overview of the Gallatin Water Science Symposium that's coming up.
Wednesday, February 19th, opportunity for managers and scientists to come together to learn about what's happening for research in the Gallatin and water management opportunities, connecting science and management.
Great, thank you. That's going to be really exciting. And I think that information will be used in a number of ways afterwards too.
Really excited about the meeting. Excited to see many of you there.
Yes, it'll be great. Any other sort of on our radars? That looked like the list we had ahead of time, but as always, we're a diverse group. Were there any quick date, important sort of topic things that aren't on our agenda today that people should just be aware of? And again, we invite you calendar and listserv as well. Anything else?
I'll just announce that we are open for our open lands other eligible projects. Were released today. We have just over $1 million available, and applications are accepted through March 21st.
Great, thank you. Appreciate that from the county, Jennifer. Great. Okay, final call. Anything else? And again, always use the chat function or our other tools too. Okay, I'm not seeing anyone, but we've got enough people that I'm not seeing everyone at the same time today. So now as we promised, it is the beginning of the, Catherine, correct me, the 4th week of the legislative session. Is that right?
That sounds right.
It goes by in a blur. And as you know, our legislature does a million things and it does it quickly. But I'm going to talk a little bit about the goal of today's discussion, and then Catherine's going to do a little outline. We've got some great folks with different perspectives to kick us off, and then we'll have some discussion as kind of the order how we're doing this meeting. First of all, our goal for this meeting is to build a shared understanding of how different user groups are thinking about issues addressed in proposed or expected policies in the 2025 session that impact water quality, water quantity, and our resilience of our land. So our 3 focus areas in this collaborative. Issues on our radar at this point are exempt wells, final degree transitions, permitting coordination, water storage funding, and nutrient standards, though there may be more. So Catherine, I'm going to turn it over to you for a little background and framing on how this works, and then we'll start introducing our folks who agreed to kick off the discussion.
Awesome. And I'm going to quickly share a visual about kind of what I'll just be touching on before we get into some of the the topic discussions on water and the 2025 legislative session. So as Karen said, we're in the 4th week of the session. We're on day 17 of a 90-day Montana legislative session. So there are lots of things at different points in the process. But overall, how this process works is a bill is being drafted, and then it gets taken up by a bill sponsor. So that is someone either in the Senate or the House, and whichever that sponsor is in, that's where it will be introduced to. So then when it gets introduced, it will get a bill number. And then once it's introduced into either the House or Senate, which is a chamber, it gets assigned to a committee, then it goes into a few hearing processes. And so the committee will hear it, and then it will go back to that chamber. So either the House or the Senate. More hearings, it will get voted on, and then it goes from whichever house or whichever chamber that it started in into the other one. So if it starts in the Senate, passes all of those committee, whatever one I said, what I say, it starts in the House, goes into whatever committee, passes in the House, then it goes to the Senate. And then after it goes through the same process there, it will probably go back to its original chamber, and then go to the governor. So it's a long process, and bills are still being introduced. There are some that were introduced on the first day and have gone already through their first chamber and have gone over to the next one. And then there are some bills like the ones that are coming out of the Comprehensive Water Review that have not been given a bill number. So that's what some of those that we're on the lookout for. And then all the other things that are fun and related to water, natural resources, and land use. So since there are all of these different processes and different movements, the session goes fast, and you really have to pay attention because a bill can go to, can get a bill number, can go to the committee, can have a hearing all in a day or two. So we really wanted to have this collaborative meeting more at the beginning of the session, as I said, day 17 of day 90, because we want to build this collective knowledge together with all of our heads. We can see what to be on the lookout for, how different user groups are thinking about different issues in general, so that when we see something pop up, we have a little bit of that background knowledge of, okay, this is what I heard this user group say, and this is how they're thinking about how it'll affect them, and this is how it impacts the Gallatin. So yeah, we're really excited to hear from a lot of people and just build that collective understanding, and also to anticipate what's to come. As I said, there's a lot that's already out there and that has a bill number, and there's a lot of things that we're anticipating, including some big topics like nutrient standards and exempt wells that haven't come out, but really want to, once those come out, want to have a lot of that background. So I'm going to start today. We're going to hear from a couple different people from different user groups and how they're thinking about these larger water topics, any kind of, overarching policies that they're hearing or anticipating in relation to water quality, water supply, and resilient lands, these things that as a collaborative we have talked about and are really front of mind for all of us in our work. So I'm going to start today with Ashley Gilbert. Ashley Gilbert is a Gallatin County senior planner. So we're excited to have her here and hear about how some of the legislative topics related to water and land use and the impact that might have on planning and development review. So Ashley.
Great, thank you. And just one housekeeping thing as we get into this, since you're first, is if folks could hold their questions till we get through kind of our discussion panelists, we'd really like to have a fuller discussion if that's all right. So thank you and take it away.
Thanks, Catherine, and thanks for having me here today. I greatly admire this group and am honored to be invited to talk with you today. So I'm going to talk about the proposed bills around exempt wells as I understand them, and how they relate to subdivision review. So it's hard to succinctly describe all the issues with the status quo in the time that I have today, but if I could sum it up, I would say the main issue that I see from our current exempt well policies and subdivision and land use is just a lack of predictability. So folks will call and say, hey, I really want to build a subdivision in this area. I'll look at it and it's very far away from a water and sewer district. So I'll say, yeah, you can subdivide, but, and then what comes after the but is a very long list of caveats and explanations of all the studies they have to do and the hoops they have to jump through in order to be able to develop outside of a water and sewer district. So in my opinion, from what I've seen in these draft policies that might be coming forth, having a closure area of the Gallatin Valley Aquifer really helps provide some direction, because when developers call or prospective subdividers call, we can kind of better direct them to where they might get an approval, which is by connecting to a water and sewer district rather than relying on the exempt well for their subdivision. And that also echoes what we put forth in the future land use map, which I believe you all are very familiar with. And overall, by kind of directing those developers to connect to water and sewer districts, that helps reduce sprawl, which is a goal of our growth policy. And by concentrating development in community cores and existing population centers around water and sewer districts or around municipalities, that really helps with efficient use of taxpayer dollars, because we've got folks kind of concentrated in an area where services can be provided rather than having folks kind of scattered in pockets all throughout the county. So in sum, I'm really excited about the predictability of the exempt well policies. Some concerns that I've heard from our constituents that I want to relay is that some folks, some agricultural producers kind of see the ability to subdivide their lot using exempt wells as maybe a nest egg or their kind of their retirement account. So I expect we'd have some pushback and some kind of fear around that loss of being able to subdivide on an exempt well. I'm excited to see monitoring and reporting for new water uses. I know myself and some other staff members have wanted to see how that would be enforced. It would be great if there was an enforcement mechanism rather than kind of the honor system. And I also have some questions around for folks in the closure area on an existing lot. My understanding is that they can have an exempt well if they're unable to connect to a water and sewer district. And I just have some questions around how it would be determined that they're unable to connect. So if they're very close to a water and sewer district, but it's very expensive to connect, would that qualify them for an exempt well? Or what is kind of the criteria and the threshold there that would allow them an exempt well? So just have some questions around clearing that up. And then I also, another thing that I'm thinking about is how the closure area might push development into other areas of the county that are not in the closure area, and just kind of thinking about the potential ripple effect from that. I do think that's something that can be mitigated with perhaps density zoning in our unzoned areas, but of course, zoning is a whole other conversation for a different time, and I encourage folks to attend those listening sessions. Megan posted the Envision Gallatin link in the chat, so we'll be talking about zoning reform in the county during those listening sessions if folks are interested in continuing that conversation. But that would be a way to kind of help create more predictability in areas outside of the closure area in the county about what kind of development can be proposed, and if it'd be possible to get up to the 24 lot maximum on exempt wells in those areas. So overall, I'm excited to see all the work that's gone into this bill and all the collaboration and coordination. And I think that this bill would ultimately be really helpful and help, as I said, provide a lot of predictability. So thanks again for having me.
Great. Thank you so much, Ashley. Really appreciate it. Catherine, I know we restacked our order. Who is next on your introductions?
Yeah, awesome. Thanks, Ashley. Those are really great pieces to keep in mind when thinking about exempt wells, whether it's the bill that comes out of the comprehensive water review or something with a different intent. Just thinking about those different pieces overall is really great. Next, we'll hear from Will Shepard. So Will Shepard's a government affairs director at the Gallatin Association of Realtors. Thanks so much for coming, Will. So he'll provide some insights on how community development is influenced by some of these water and land use policies and how they're thinking about them at GAR.
Yeah, so I'm Will Shepherd. I'm the Government Affairs Director, so in short, I'm kind of a lobbyist without the official lobbyist title. We are a local realtor association, so we cover counties ranging from Beaverhead to Wheatland and Sweetgrass. We have Park, Gallatin, and so on. There's 6 of them. We are not really involved at the state level. We have our state association, the Montana Association of Realtors, tackle that kind of work. But that being said, we are really concerned with all things water and sewer and land use in general. So kind of really quickly, the realtor perspective on the 25 legislative session water-wise, we're really interested in and are actively monitoring any water or sewer proposal that impacts housing in just about any way. So I'll talk primarily in short, briefly about the exempt wells and comprehensive water boundary from DNRC and how that's going to impact our state and local stuff. But really quickly, the primary political focus we have is, as an association, is access to home ownership for all income levels, private property rights, and just generally beneficial policies. So looking for policies that benefit the daily and future lives of Southwest Montana communities as a local association, and the state looks out for the entire state. So diving in really quickly, kind of a brief overview, the status quo for our take on exempt wells is that we are really concerned with the growth factor that having these alluvial boundaries set up as, and what that means for housing in general. So overly simplified, the key reason we believe is path forward is that we prefer the status quo over the proposed DNRC map. And the reason for that is that property taxes and impact fees therein, anything development related, will be largely negatively impacted, that they will rise exponentially. The reason I say that is that the municipal government services, the infrastructure needed, will be relied on almost exclusively to provide drinking water, potable water of any kind for any new residential development outside of municipal boundaries. And we don't know if that's sustainable. Taking a quick step back, we are really concerned with just all things science here. So we would much prefer to see science-backed decision-making. And if the science says, hey, actually, none of Gallatin Valley should have exempt wells, we are absolutely okay with that. But we are guessing that more research and more data collection will mean that exempt wells can be kind of sporadically put throughout Gallatin Valley and Gallatin County, as well as almost all of Southwest Montana. Looking kind of ahead at what this proposal means, the language obviously limits exempt well uses in almost all areas in Montana. So another key concern that raises is housing affordability. Without water, housing options are limited, both physically and legally. So again, we just want to see well-researched, science-based data provided that supports either the maps or a new map, or just the bill in general. Kind of, again, that main concern for us is the alluvial aquifer boundaries, and what that will mean on zoning, planning, development regulations, and then as Ashley kind of touched on, the future county zoning effort that is coming here sooner than later, but the recently enacted flume. The ability to regulate growth is a really important key factor in why we would prefer the status quo over this proposal. The proposed map boundaries will really limit the efficacy of our flume tools. So again, our concerns, senior water rights holders in geographical areas will be affected. We support not using exempt wells for those senior water right holders. We also support not using exempt wells where groundwater is connected to surface water, as well as areas that will negatively impact rivers and streams. So long story short, we're really encouraged by the collective minds that are really working on this science-backed, environmentally sensitive procedural process in this bill, and we're thrilled that collaborations like this and many more are happening throughout the state in related and unrelated fields. And we're really appreciative that this is an ongoing effort to make sure that the best environmentally friendly, housing friendly options are presented. So thank you. Appreciate it.
Great. Thank you, Will. That was really helpful. Appreciate hearing that and walking us through some of the nuance. It's great setup for discussion. So next up, I think we're going to senior water rights with Walt, right? Is that right, Catherine?
Yeah, awesome. Thanks so much, Will, and also for grounding us in that connection between water and housing. That's a really important one, and obviously something that county just went through with the future land use map and affordable housing. So thanks. Next up, we have Walt Sales. So Walt is a senior water rights holder, a rancher, former senator. Did I say he's on the board of Aggie, Association of Gallatin Agricultural Irrigators? So we're excited to have him here and talk about the perspective of agriculture and senior water rights holders when thinking about some of these water issues.
All right. Can you hear me fine, Catherine?
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You bet. So right as they introduced me, it's awesome. I'm now retired from the legislative world, and so I've so much enjoyed being on this side of life again. But with that, just lightly, I want to touch a little bit on, I keep hearing how you sort of wait for a LC draft to get either House or Senate number. But it's, I think, important that if you know the sponsor of that bill, to reach out to them in that LC draft stage and visit with them to see, because it makes it so much easier to be able to work on a bill before it gets introduced, if the sponsor is willing to adjust or add your concerns in, and even up front, if he knows before committee some of the challenges and he's willing to work with you, he or they are willing to work with you, it truly makes it easier, because once it's in a front of a committee and introduced, it will take an amendment from everybody to pass. And so it's just a little, I guess, more of a process. So you might keep that in mind as you look at these bills. And we can give Catherine, if needed, a site. If you don't have it, reach out or talk to us in the chat. I'm sure she'll be able to bring up the bill tracking site on the state site that makes it much easier to search for water bills. So with that, Aggie, I'll talk a little bit about that. I've been a member of Aggie since the beginning, and truly we do too, right? We're on that funny place where we have the senior water rights, but we also have users that want to use them for the future generations, but also, that may be without any changes to the land use, but there are those users that we have that need to change some of that land use. So we try to ride that balance and not be too much on one side of the fence or the other. What we do try to do is to make sure that it will be a sustainable use in the future, because all of our water that we're using, no matter what you're doing, depends on how sustainable and reliable that is. So with that being said, some of the bills that we're looking at as far as Aggie and the water users, the ag side, land use bills, of course, those are very important to us. And there's been a lot, already in local government, and some of those, how they affect us. Water management, usually in front of natural resources. Those bills, again, will come up, and they already have. That's where a lot of the water comp bills are going to come from. And then we've talked a lot about the future water supply bill. That's one that I hope we can spend a little bit of time on and get a good support from this group, because truly, even as we're talking about exempt wells, if we don't start putting money into the future of our water supply, and have an account set up for the direction that the state wants to go, we're never going to be able to offset the growth, and we'll run our resource, the water, into the dirt, no different than a lot of the states. So hopefully we'll talk a little bit more and get some good support from that. And then the other thing I want to bring, that we as Aggie do, we really work hard on protecting the prior appropriation doctrine and no prioritization of use. We like to look at the ability to use the water, and we don't necessarily want to get in that fight of who is using it, but to allow the use. As you all know, that property right is the use of the water. The state owns the water. And then last, and we'll move on because I'm sure there'll be questions. On the exempt well bill, last session, we worked on the permitting side, but a lot of times it just seems that growth, domestic use, residential use feels like one of their only opportunities is to use the exempt well, to use the exemption to get their water. Remember that we worked hard on House Bill 114 to make the process easier. We spent a whole interim on that, increased the funding, increased that process to help. So there is a way to address if the adverse effect is there to help mitigate, but the exemption in our eyes has become almost a status quo to get water, and we senior water rights have a very hard time being able to enter into any objections until it's too late, right? And that's where we're at today. So with that, I appreciate the work this is doing, the amount of, honestly, in Helena, these collaboratives are very strong and very appreciated, because as a legislator, it's easy to get in a fishbowl, and it's so nice to hear you guys vet out issues, work them out, and then bring them to us. So thank you for attending.
Great. Thank you so much, Walt. It's so good to see you, and thank you for helping us think through some of that. Catherine, you wanted to frame this, and I believe we have a last speaker too today.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks so much, Walt. And I think I heard you talk about some water storage bills, so we can definitely touch on that in discussion, and we'll flag that one. Awesome. So we have lastly from Trout Unlimited. I don't think I see Clayton here. I think he had another prior commitment, but I believe he sent Jeff Lucas in his place. So we're going to hear from Jeff about the water management at the state level and the impact of our fisheries and aquatic ecosystems.
Hello, everyone. So I'm going to have to plead a little ignorance here. I recently started at Trout Unlimited, and as we all know, water policy is, extremely difficult to get a grasp on to the point where you can promote legislation. So I am running in support of Clayton's work around the Capitol, but he was booked in another meeting that actually is addressing exempt wells with the other group members that have been working on the WIPIC package, and I was hoping that he could get out of that meeting in time, because I'm quite honestly, I don't want to lead people astray on what is actually happening, and there have been some moving parts on the pieces of legislation recently, particularly with exempt wells. That's exactly what he's discussing right now. So I don't know if we could move to questions from the group from the previous 3 speakers, so that it would give Clayton a little bit of time to get out of that meeting and onto this one. I know he's prioritizing it and wants to get into this chat to help everybody understand what's going on. But would that be possible? Like I said, I have a decent grasp of what we're doing, but not to the extent that Clayton could fully inform everybody.
Yeah, of course, Jeff, and we're really happy to have you and think prospectively too. Connor, I know you don't do it every day, but I wonder if there were any ecological issues you wanted to bring up, or Catherine, you wanted to pinpoint here in the discussions for the setup. But of course we can do that, Jeff, and hopefully Clayton can get on. Catherine,
I
was there
appreciate that.
anything, or Connor, was there anything just sort of thematically as opposed to a specific bill in the legislature that
Yeah,
comes
I
from the
mean,
fisheries?
if Jeff feels uncomfortable talking on some of it, I know I'm even further removed, but Trout Unlimited's perspective is just, the importance of the connectivity between those, both our groundwater and our streams, and obviously potentially how that could impact both our trout fisheries, the ecosystem, and also senior water rights users. So yeah, there's a lot of different things that play in there, and hopefully Clayton can hop on here and speak a little bit more to it. But from my understanding, the exempt well was kind of laid out there as like a really great option in like less developed areas where you couldn't access the normal water supplies in our cities and municipalities. But now it's just been, kind of like Walt said, kind of the status quo when people are putting in some of these developments. So we just want to really make sure that we aren't negatively impacting the water supply in our rivers for the ecosystems and also for senior water rights. But again, hopefully Clayton will hop on here.
Great. And Lily just put the reminder in the chat for either of you before we go to questions, and then we'll open it up to all. Are there any perspective or encouragement on other things that are not just exempt wells, but other topics that you see coming up potentially in the legislature?
Is that open to anybody, Karen? And
Yeah, we'll start
Well-
opening this up. Why
Well-
don't we, and not put
well-
Connor and Jeff on the spot, although you're both
Well, I'd love to
modest.
talk right on the fish guys. I mean, especially, man, that'd be great. I'm pretty much a fish guy, so as Clayton would tell you. But one thing that really, and I think Connor would remember, but our stream gauging bills, right, that we had, Senate Bill 55 and 61, both Senator Curry, a Democrat, and Senator Gillespie, a Republican, and both of these were WIPIC bills, right, Water Policy Interim Committee bills, but they were presented, probably 10 days ago. And Senator Curry's on the floor, and maybe some of you read the letter to the editor today, but I was shocked at how a committee bill was so scrutinized and held up. And again, folks, remember, this is on stream gauging, and all of us fought very hard to start getting, like you heard, science and measurable and knowing what is going on with our flows. And these bills were to help protect the work that we've put in place to where future legislators don't necessarily have to go back and try to understand, but it would truly be in statute the need and the value of stream gauging and funding and the support that the state has. So that was the intent of these two bills. But I do think on the resource, that was very important. So this will be a very interesting session. And yeah, we can talk about other bills, but I did want you to know that the stream gauge, which you would think would be a fairly easy move, was a difficult move. So
yeah, and I can fill in a little context with that one, and that yeah, I was in the committee hearings for both of those stream gauge bills that Curdy and Gillespie had. Gillespie's sailed through with no debate and unanimous support. Curdy's it passed out of committee, I believe 8-4, with a bit more scrutiny, but it was very surprising to see that his stream gauge bill has, I think so far in the entire session, taken up the most floor time of any bill. And that, I don't know that we should really be using that as a gauge of how the rest of the WIPIC bills are going to go, that had more to do with a lot of the internal politics happening inside the building, particularly in the Senate. And so I want to caution everybody to not read too much into the viability of the WIPIC bills based on Curdy's stream gauge bill, floor treatment, I guess we'll call it. It did pass out of the Senate at, I believe, 29-11, 28-22, 29-11, but, or at 29-21. And so, that's going to move over to the House. Gillespie's bill moved over to the House and got its first reading there yesterday. It was well received. So, as has been mentioned previously on this call a few times, that it is really hard to address some of these issues without good data and science. I think those two bills, while they weren't the big bills within the WIPIC package, when compared to streamline change and exempt wells, provisional permits, and waiver of adverse effect, those were kind of the smaller ones, but they do supplement those other bills, and so they are pretty important. So it was good to see those get out. I did get a message from Clayton that he's not going to be able to make the meeting at least for another 15 minutes. He's in negotiations actually on exempt wells right now. So, I could give a quick just rundown of what is in the WIPIC package. And that would be waiver of adverse effect, which missed its sunset in 2017 and the last session. It was not intended to expire. And so we're just simply getting that back into form and getting back into statute. Provisional permits was SB 72 of 2023. This does have sideboards on who can apply for these, but we do believe it provides clarity on a timeline for rights holders, which is important, as we all know. Modification of can within the statute language is possibly an issue that they're going to have to work on. Current rights holders could file a permit asking for a provisional permit, which would essentially be an expansion of their rights before final decree. But CE is not expecting, Clayton's not expecting many, if any, provisional permit applications post passage. So hopefully, this is more much ado about nothing than anything major. Then we have a judiciary bill, and this deals with the water courts. I won't get too in depth on that one. Then we have streamline change, and then a coordination bill, and then exempt wells. And honestly, I do not want to get too into the weeds myself on exempt wells, just because Clayton has been the one at the negotiating table with, everyone from the Galt family to Taylor Luther Group, to the cities, and even Rhonda at the Well Drillers Association. So at the risk of leading people down any kind of incorrect path, I'm kind of going to punt on exempt wells, and I apologize for that.
That's just fine, Jeff. And we're, as you can tell from our initial speakers, we have a lot of different perspectives, and how do we make this work for everyone? If it's okay, I'm going to move to some more Q&A and see, but Walt, I will reserve time because you brought up water storage. I want to make sure if it doesn't come up in questions, we get back to that as well. Did you have something on this too?
One quick clarification, and Jeff, you called those the water comprehensive review bills WIPIC bills, and they're not per se WIPIC. The committee didn't hear them and didn't move them, so they will not be a WIPIC committee bill. They're going to come out of individual sponsors. Does that follow?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, and I apologize for misstating that. These were bills that were formed and put together by WIPIC, but they are not going to be promoted in the building as such by WIPIC. In some cases, you'll have some people that were part of WIPIC as sponsors of the bills, but they will be individual legislators' sponsors. So I appreciate that, Walt, for clarifying that.
Great, thank you. I'm going to move to questions, just seeing if we have, and also since I know a lot of you also have interests as stakeholders in thinking about this in addition to questions. If you have observations or other things to think about with the legislature, we can bring that up too. One housekeeping thing. Thank you, Will. That's great. And Chad. I can't see everybody today, so if you wouldn't mind going to React and using the open hand because it pops you to the top, or if that doesn't work for you, put it in chat or just speak up. But I'm hoping to catch people, and I apologize if I don't see you instantly. But does anybody have sort of a question or an observation they want to start with? We'd like to make sure we get as much out of the folks who did some prep, who we really appreciate doing that, as well as hearing from more of you.
Also, while people think about any questions, Carrie and Danica shared the other week that DNRC, or the Department of Natural Resources, and I'll link this here, has come out with some really awesome one-pagers about some of those comprehensive water review bills. So great summary, a lot of the ones that Jeff just talked about. So if you go to that link, you'll see that LC number. So again, it's got a sponsor. It's not yet gone through the whole legal review process. So some of that language is still being put out. So these are things that we're expecting to see in bill draft soon. So thank you so much, Carrie and Danica.
Yeah, and Danica, Carrie, you want to say anything on those? It was great to have you earlier. I hope folks that weren't able to come were able to review before this meeting. Danica, Carrie, you have anything you want to say on these?
I can probably speak on behalf of both of us that you guys, we couldn't have said it better than a lot of you did. This was a really great summary. I know I've been deferring to these handouts because they really do concisely wrap everything together. Right now, we're just kind of in wait and see mode because things can change pretty quickly during session.
That's a really apt statement, Danica, isn't it? Sometimes in the course of a single day, it appears. Great, thank you. Questions? Love to hear kind of what people are thinking about. Okay, then while we're waiting, well, why don't we return to your water storage since you bookmarked that? Let's hear a little more. Let's get some
Sure.
other perspectives and think about how to think about this.
Right. So this and thank you for writing. This will give you some time to think about questions. But so I believe that the sign number is House Bill 256, and now Representative Walsh will be carrying it. And you'll see when you bring it up, it has a good list of supporters, of co-sponsors, we call them, underneath the title, and from both parties and from some pretty, leadership type positions. So with that, the state's looking at forming a Montana Water Development account, and it will allow, I believe it's right now proposed to be 50 million per year. And they will have to allocate that money, and I don't have it in front of me, but I believe allocate that money like a 10% of that will go towards water storage pilot projects and dam inspections. But there's at least an account, and what's going to be important, I hope, and right as this moves forward, if any of you are interested, in my mind, it's not so much the numbers and the scrutiny of how the state moves that around, but it's just getting the framework of an account set up, because we have not been able to do this, for a long time, to put money towards the advancement and protections of our water. So it truly, to me, the state is now saying that we value with our checkbook what our resources is up against, and how do we maintain a new normal and try to come up with solutions that keeps and slows the flow of our water. DAMP is a great example. I mean, there's so many programs that can benefit from this, but it's our users, right? Our new development, ag side, industrial, commercial, that are really going to, down the road, be able to have that sustainable water that you all talk about. One point I do want to bring up is, and maybe some of you are familiar with the Headwaters Academy in Bozeman, but last year, the 7th grade class sort of nabbed onto the drought effects of what they were seeing and reached out to Aggie and worked with Aggie on a project up at Yellowstone Club, and actually made snow mounds. But they wanted to continue that same train of thought, and they've used this bill, this HB 256, as sort of their class project, and they're going to track it, follow it, and actually engage, and hopefully be able to, if nothing else, Zoom, but hopefully go up and attend some of the committee. And so you've got a 7th grade class that will help move this along, that will help legislators see the value, right, of that next generation. People are looking, it's pretty impressive when a young class is looking at how they can help manage this resource. I was impressed. So hopefully that's one that's on your radar. You'll engage with Rep. Walsh or any of the others that you see that support it. And, it's a large amount of money, but it's hopefully one that you can all get behind.
Great, thank you. Other panelists or other folks, do you have knowledge about this water storage bill, or thinking about water storage more generally? Because you're talking infrastructure, this group's also thought about preserving those high recharge areas, which again connects to DAMP. But anyone else have information or perspective on how the storage piece might work with some of your priorities? Yeah, Connor.
Yeah, I mean, the majority, I do not have the knowledge of this current bill that maybe Jeff or Clayton would, and maybe Jeff, you want to jump in if you know something else. But I mean, there is some money carved out there for some of these more like slow the flow projects, like Walt is talking about, some of these natural storage projects, which are things that we do with some of our restoration work. And so it's really encouraging to see folks, all across the state seeing the importance of trying to keep water on the landscape as long as possible, so that we get to use it for those late season flows and things like that. So water storage is something, we're always thinking about in a lot of restoration work. And so it's really cool to see that acknowledged and included in some of this, some of these bills.
Great, thanks, Connor. Others, Will or Ashley, kind of thinking about your planning and your real estate backgrounds. Any thoughts on how this might intersect, as Walt mentioned it might in the future?
I don't want to touch on something that I don't know enough about, but I know that this is one of those that we're not actively monitoring like we are those other bills I mentioned in the chat. But this is one that we are keeping an eye on to an extent. Beyond that, I'm not going to answer that question really. So if you do have any questions just generally for me or for realtors in general, my email is will@gallatinrealtors.com. So feel free to shoot me an email or a question or whatever, and I can do my best to answer it right away or find someone who does know the answer.
Great. Thanks, Will. I appreciate that. Ashley, any thoughts from kind of the county and planning perspective on this, or?
I too probably don't know enough to comment, but I took some notes on what Walt described, and I don't see any conflicts with any county planning efforts. This is one I'd love to look more into, but yeah, not too much to say on that one.
Maybe something that comes to mind, Ashley, is that in the Gallatin County future land use map, you guys did include those aquifer recharge zones, sort of identifying where there's sort of the most capacity to store water on the landscape and have beneficial impacts to downstream water users, both of all sorts, right? So folks that are on groundwater wells, agricultural users, and then late stream flows. So I could see some alignment there potentially.
Right, and Lily, I think that fits perfect, right, with, as I brought up House Bill 114 and going through the permitting process, we hear a lot of times how hard it is to mitigate, right, and offset some of this use, to where I think this bill is going to help us, like you're saying, put that water where it's needed, understand where it's needed, and make it so much easier to move and use our water in a watershed, rather than not having it and just, right, seeing it leave. So I think it would affect every one of us.
And while sometimes water storage can make folks nervous, I think in the past,
Okay.
maybe we have not always considered sort of ecological impacts when we think about water
And
storage.
right, I've moved so far ahead, and I'm sorry. Yes, now, depending on your interpretation or understanding of what storage is, but I honestly feel, right, and I've said this many times, and I picked this phrase from a good neighbor, but that God has given us the best reservoir, and it's the ground, right? So I've made that move to where I'm not trying to build another Lake Mead or whatever we want to call it. I think there's a ton of opportunity for us to just slow that flow, get it into the ground. As we've heard, it's going to come out later. Maybe address some of the mitigation zones or recharge zones in the valley. The door is wide open. We just have to think out of the box, and how do we manage the new normal and try to keep that water table so the developers of any type of water can then actually have a sustainable amount. I'm sorry if I spooked you thinking that it was going to be big cement and block infrastructure and wakeboards and whatever else is on those lakes.
Yeah, yours.
It might be. I'm not going to say it won't be, but.
Yeah, well, I think that was well said of, where I know this collaborative, as you as a member and a resident of this watershed, has really, over the last 70 years or so, really evolved in what our understanding is and what technologies and approaches can be used. So thank you for that. And
I wondered, Ashley, I had a question for you. If you could expand a little bit on this idea of the current planning efforts at the county level, and you touched on this, and potentially how exempt wells can impact your ability to use your local jurisdiction and guide growth according to the sort of vision outlined by the community, right? You guys did such an incredible job reaching out to the community and understanding local wants, needs, and priorities. And yeah, so sort of thinking about the alignment, expanding on the alignment of bills potentially coming down the pipe and the plume.
Yeah, so I'll just expand on the Gallatin Valley Aquifer kind of closure. So my understanding is that, so in an unzoned area, there are no density restrictions, right? So a developer could come forth and say, I want to propose X many lots, and they can go ahead and do that. Whereas if zoning was in place, there's likely some sort of restrictions around density. So now we have the future land use map, which helps guide us towards guiding those developers on what kinds of densities might be appropriate in certain areas. but it is a non-regulatory tool. So certainly a developer can still propose as many lots as they can get, usually well and septic approval for through their COSA. So I think having these closure areas really helps us in those unzoned areas to do what the flume is intended to do, which is direct development towards areas with water and sewer connection. And I think that really helps the developers as well as the general community. I think, there's certainly a strong financial incentive to develop in Gallatin Valley right now. And even though you have to jump through a lot of hoops to get your subdivision approved on well and septic, you can still get there. So it might be worth it to try and demonstrate how impacts to water quality and quantity are being mitigated with a subdivision proposal. But a developer could try and jump through all those hoops, spend tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of dollars on those studies and still get a denial by the county commission. And then they either have to scrap their project or they have to go back to the drawing board and restart the process. So I think this just really helps us to kind of direct those energies towards water and sewer districts where the effort can be placed on a development that's more likely to get approved based off of the future land use map and based off of more of this community vision about where wells should go in the valley and where they shouldn't, and the appropriateness of connecting to centralized water and sewer.
Thanks, Ashley.
Great. Oh, sorry, Walt, it looks like you're talking, but you're muted.
Sorry.
I do it all the time.
Well, if I could, on an Aggie front, and you guys are well versed in this next piece, and there's really no legislative fix that I know of yet, but as you probably know, right, we have a ditch member in what I'll call the Bozeman area that has had some issues with dewatering and using the ditches, their canal, to transport that water. And there's no connection, right, between the permittee, and that individual water conveyance facility. And we're trying to find a way that we can address that, so there's at least that connection and what I think would be the allowance of using that property right, and that secondary easement to transport that water. But I'm not finding a simple fix, so I'm throwing it out there for you guys. If offline or later you could visit with me if you have some ideas. But truly, the general permit and stormwater permits, that are used, it seems they're able to go ahead and use our infrastructure without any notification or permission, which I don't get. But my thick head maybe just doesn't let me think right. So if you guys have any insight, please share it.
Well, would you
It doesn't have to
type,
be on this format. It can be later if.
would you type your question into the chat so we have,
Come on. Yeah. I will try, okay? I'm not that super duper of a typer, but you bet.
or a follow-up email so that we make sure
Yeah.
we understand. Yeah.
Yeah,
thanks.
yeah. No, that'd be great. Thank you.
Because I think, and Walt, this is good because Suze too brought this up, is this intersection between those. We don't really have a very clear handle yet. Other questions? Otherwise, Will, you brought up several non-exempt bills that you're thinking about that you didn't talk about at the beginning. Do you want to expand on a couple of these? Help us think through kind of from a realtor and a housing perspective, how you're thinking about these?
Sure, happy to. Let me see. I think probably one, it's not necessarily super related to water, but I think it will have an impact on water, is the impact fees, which is Senate Bill 133. And just kind of a little more overview on the realtor stance and in general is that we are looking to provide or encourage community benefit to be considered first and foremost with any of these bills, and make sure that the next 10 years is planned for well, and not that we are kind of playing catch up on anything. And that's, again, kind of our general policy stance and kind of methodology for political involvement. So impact fees, and again, this is one that just as a preface to the remainder of this statement, that all of these bills that we are talking about today and in the future are issues that our state association weighs in on far more than we as a local association will ever weigh in on. If there's something of concern like the exempt wells, we will send our thoughts to Montana Association of Realtors, and they will act on that. But we are not regularly keeping in touch with legislators or trying to impact bills on a day-to-day basis. We kind of take that broader look. So kind of to wrap that up, the impact fees, while it's not water focused, is really about managing growth and making sure that there is money available to municipal governments, that housing is and remains a priority for all things legislative. So I guess to kind of wrap that up in something that it resembles a complete thought, that we are really looking for that benefit to a community, whether that's 4 houses, a big city like Bozeman, that we want to make sure that the sidewalks are able to be in place, that sewer capacity is where it needs to be, that municipal services aren't strained too much, that our land use is used properly, in that we are developing areas that can and should be developed both physically and legally. So that's kind of our stance generally. It's way too distilled in that, but applies to a lot of these bills. So hope that's helpful. Yeah.
Great, thank you. And of course, part of impact fees tend to be the water and sewer, of course, right? So that's, thinking about this group, a pretty clear place where I'm wondering, do you have any thoughts at this point on specifics around those, or is it more like thinking proactively as you kind of sit at the top there?
On mute. Yeah, so one, I mean, politics is all reactive and never proactive. So that's that answer. But we do look to sponsor bills on some level to try and get ahead of issues. Don't begin to ask me what those look like, because I have genuinely no idea. But yeah, it really comes down to, for water stuff, let's make sure that Bozeman isn't exceeding their capacity to provide support to folks that need a well in the Triangle area, and asking Belgrade to pick up that burden. Making sure that Four Corners can be annexed into Belgrade or Bozeman if they want to be, or individual properties can choose to do that as well. But yeah, sewer and water are key issues for us in this legislative session. Making sure that we are putting forth legislation or supporting legislation that is environmentally sensible, that isn't going to withdraw drop water and not replace it, that isn't going to negatively impact our streams and watershed systems, all things in that vein. So yes, to answer your question, Karen, it's really trying to be as proactive, but recognizing that it's really all reactive. And then again, just coming at it from the housing standpoint, in that, hey, we want to make life easier for more units to be on the market in all income levels.
Great, thank you. That's a great articulation. Sue, if you have something quick, and I saw Clayton came on too, and I want to make sure we give him a little time. Sue, do you have a quick observation or question? Oh, you're muted.
there, now I'm unmuted. Okay, my view is that your best storage option is keep ditches flowing because it's landscape wide for recharge. And one of the places that has to be addressed is in subdivision review, which is going on now and is also now on the county level anyway. And you have to talk about how to keep the ditches flowing and the individuals at the individual subdivision level in order to maintain maintenance at that level. And as Walt said, at any time you put in, it has to go in at the very earliest stages in order for it to actually happen. And so if we want to keep the ditches flowing, you have to have the contact with the ditch on how to do it, because at that stage, you're actually determining who's going to maintain the ditch and who's going to use the water and this kind of stuff in perpetuity. And that's the level at which that is set up for the future. The other
Great.
one is the capacity of the existing water and sewer systems. I understood that Four Corners is maxed out right now.
So thinking that proactive
Belgrade
piece.
is a pay Peter, rob Peter to pay Paul system where you have to have more development in order to expand. The airport is now pinching that in terms of the lagoons. There's all sorts of stuff there that getting the capacity for water and sewer is not a simple process. And
Right.
when you cut that off, then that makes it difficult.
Yeah, it does.
This is a balance not only at the state level, but also, at the local level and how these things connect to each other.
Yeah, no, that's really important. And it sounds like we should look for those legislative pieces too, as well as the other tools in the toolbox. Catherine, I want to kick this over to you. I know we've got Clayton on, and then I think Elizabeth had a mention in the chat, but maybe Clayton, we're so glad you were able to make it a little bit. Connor and Jeff did a great job, but you want to introduce Clayton, and maybe we could, if it's okay, just have a couple minutes kind of overview of some of the issues TU's looking at.
Yeah, Clayton, thanks so much for coming. We've heard you've been in some big and exciting meetings, so just excited to hear a little bit about how, so Clayton Elliott works for Montana Trout Unlimited and is the Conservation and Government Affairs Director. And so we're really excited to have him here to talk a little bit about, how fisheries, ecosystems are thinking about a lot of these policies, but also Clayton was really pivotal in a lot of the discussions at the comprehensive water review level. So has a lot of that background. So Clayton, I'll kick it to you.
Great, thanks. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Perfect. I appreciate it. And I apologize for being late today. It's a typical legislative day that best laid plans never work out. So I appreciate the flexibility, and I'm sure that Jeff and Connor did a great job doing an overview. I'd say more so putting my comprehensive review hat on. Obviously, it's a very busy water session, a lot of legislative topics being considered that came out of discussions of the comprehensive water review. I would say right off the bat, one of the more exciting outcomes of that conversation in the comp review and then heard by the governor's office and part of the governor's budget is a transformational investment in water storage. Creating a new investment fund around water storage that I think helps meet both our current needs and future opportunities around water storage. So $100 million investment fund where the interest earned off of that investment fund goes both to pay for existing state water projects as well as a new innovation fund to support innovative strategies around storage. Aside from that, things are getting right on the cusp of being busy. The comp review bills, and I'm sure that you've covered a number of those, are being introduced this week and into next week. I would expect to see the exempt well bill coming from the comp review group probably late this week, early next week, introduced with a hearing to follow. The other bills around future water demands and supply, exceptions to the change process, introduced probably late this week. And the provisional, or not provisional permit, waiver of adverse effect bill, Senate Bill 190, was introduced last week. Expect a hearing on that in the Senate coming up as well. But taken together as a package, these are a number of pieces of legislation, I think, that are trying to recognize the challenges related to our growth in the state of Montana in places like the Gallatin Valley, but also taking a holistic view of trying to expand the pie and deal with that sort of crash course of supply and demand. On the other side, there's a number of complex issues related to the adjudication and where we go from here after the adjudication is completed, which I'm happy to say I think the end is somewhat in sight, not entirely close, but we're certainly seem to have sort of gotten over the hump in the adjudication process. And so the comp review recommended legislation dealing with the role of the judiciary and also reconciling those provisional permits and changes with final decrees. Won't delve into that. I saw a note from Walt. There were also a couple bills that came out of the Water Policy Interim Committee process, and Senator Sales was a member there, so he probably spoke well to those around stream gauging, making sure that the state of Montana is being proactive in maintaining our stream gauge network, and then also a bill related to private fish ponds, and I think a growing concern amongst a diverse group of folks about both the threats of those private fish ponds to transmission of aquatic invasive species and pathogens, as well as the consumptive use of water, which I think House Bill 74, which passed out of committee last week, addresses a number of those issues. So I know you have probably covered a lot of these topics. I'm happy to answer any questions that folks have about any of them.
Great, thank you, Clayton. Yeah, let's see if there are more. Catherine, you might want to wrap up. I just want to draw people's attention to that Keith Wellstone, before he left, it looked like you saw it too, Clayton, was just explaining some of the cost coverage stuff that WIPIC and that HB 74 is covering with that bill too. And I think we're hearing from these, it's great today, from a number of different perspectives of how we can support more than one water user group. Catherine, you want to kind of frame it up? Let's see what else. And I know we had Elizabeth's comment hanging out there too.
I would just jump in real quick before Catherine, and I think you hit it right on the nose. I mean, I think today's era, different than when I probably started in my career working on water policy 15 years ago. I think today's era is dominated by finding compromise, working together, sharing an understanding of where diverse water users are coming from, and trying to solve problems in a holistic way. I think those of us concerned about water, I know that we will, at the end of the day, still have differences of opinion, but the more that we can work together and understand each other's unique challenges and try to find solutions that are true compromises and paths forward, I think that spirit of collaboration is alive and well. And certainly, I think a market shift in debates around water policy in the last decade in my career.
And maybe Clayton, along those lines, and I think that's our sort of main goal for today, is to understand where each different user group is coming from to build that compassion. And so just wondered if maybe just like one more minute, sorry, Karen, and then she's gonna hard stop us, but on really that perspective of aquatic ecosystems, right? Because as TU, that's, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but that's the lens that you're looking at this from. And so I think really understanding the impact to aquatic resources of these bills.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And certainly everybody in the water community comes up here with their own perspective and agenda. At the end of the day, for me, I always go back to our mission statement, which see in how we approach legislation, which is to conserve, protect, and restore Montana's cold water fisheries. Obviously, there is a element of that which is conserving and protecting the function of aquatic ecosystems for the benefit not only of fish, but I think of communities and production agriculture, for example. You know, I mean, that is certainly a group that we and I hate to say group, but a constituency that we work closely with and have shared interests on many subjects around. But it's also the element of restoration. And I think that's a word that has been on the front of my tongue quite a bit in the last few weeks in the Capitol, is how do we take these opportunities and recognize that there's a tremendous opportunity to restore natural system function that both promotes good fish in my, in my lens, good fish habitat, but also makes our water systems more functional for agricultural production for municipalities. I think that there is more win-win than oftentimes you hear in the press.
Thank you, Clayton. Yeah, as Lily mentioned, I think we could keep talking, and all of you have so much to offer as we think about this. But one of the things we wanted to wrap up with is, this is, as Catherine mentioned, day 17, I think, of the session. Wanted to hear from our presenters today, but also the larger group, about how you're tracking sessions and bills and things. Some of you brought some of this up earlier, but we want to make sure people really have these resources, how you're engaging constituents, so we can make sure that the best knowledge and perspectives, that we can bring that clearly to our legislator, and any resources you have, whether it's tracking bills or being more informed, so that this group can try to contribute as much as possible during the session. So that was kind of a lot, but kind of what's our follow-up? What's your recommendations for engaging, and what tools would you like to hook this group up with? Walt, if it's okay, I might start with you, because you're our old hand at this from a number of perspectives.
Well, yeah, old is right, but no, like I said earlier, definitely if you see those LCs and the sponsors, use who you know and visit with them earlier. And Clayton can tell you it's a whole lot easier, to work and change and amend and work in pieces to massage a bill before it gets introduced, to where then you have to amend it in front of a whole committee. We can put in, or maybe Clayton, he's much better at typing and listening and talking, but maybe the site for the bill tracker would be something that we could throw up in the chat, and or Danica, anybody can do that. But those are great ways to do it. You can do a bill search under water. Each group sort of probably already does that, but if you don't, that will be made available in the chat.
It is, thank you.
There, look at that, just like magic. Thank you, Danica. And then earlier rather than later, right? No different than when somebody comes up to commissioner, in the county level or at the city level, and you come to the podium loaded for bear. So you're better off to work as a group. And just like I said earlier, this group, when moves an action, is heard by legislators and truly enjoyed, because you have vetted and worked on and brought a local solution, and then they can at least listen and respect that, and then maybe it will fit in. But it's awful hard to bring a whole new aspect during the session. Legislators are busy. It's like drinking from a fire hose. You can well imagine if it's in your wheelhouse, it's a little easier, but when it's not, so they're hit hard. So if you're expecting to change the world during the session, it's sort of tough. The interim's a great time to work there. But with that being said, pay attention on the work and reach out to your groups and your lobbyists. Lobbyists are a great way. You all have them, and just make sure that they're doing the work, that you want them to do. Clayton?
I think that's a great overview. I mean, utilize the groups here. I think most of us all probably have our own bill tracking system of bills that we're watching on our website. I know that Montana TU does. I assume the realtors and others, Aggie does as well. So reach out to your groups, have your groups who are spending time and resources help you track and monitor. I will say, even as a professional, the new website and system on the state website is difficult. So don't feel discouraged, because those of us who do this as a living are also having trouble. So reach out. And then the last thing I would just mention, I think is always the most important, is talk to your legislator. Reach out to your legislator, even though they might not be somebody who is in the niche of working on water policy. They might have gone to Helena to work on other things. Hearing from their constituent directly, I think, makes a big difference, and make sure that they know that these are issues that are important to you. Because at the end of the day, those all 150 legislators are going to have to debate and discuss and vote on these issues. So making sure that your legislator knows that these issues matter to you, I think, is important. We in the building, losing folks like Senator Sales from the body, are all sort of reeling with a relatively young, new, green group of legislators around water policy, which is a very difficult technical issue. And so the more legislators who are hearing from their constituents about water is a benefit to those of us in the building.
And Clayton, maybe just like removing a bar to entry here, and for other folks too, if you guys do have resources of what your group is tracking, drop those links in the chat. If you don't get around to that, share them through Gaggle by emailing the Gaggle listserv. And then we can include those resources in a follow-up email to this meeting. So just, I think, don't even wait for us to reach out. Just go ahead and share if that's comfortable.
I will have Jeff or Connor do that for us. Contrary to Senator Sales' opinion, I am not very technologically savvy. So there, I see Connor did that for us.
Yeah,
So.
Connor's put it in. So great. Thank you. Will, and then Ashley, I want to hear from you on kind of your thoughts on this too, just to make sure we get as much as we can.
Yeah, again, we are not really heavily involved at the state level. And that's of our state association, but Bill Tracker is great. You can sign up for free. I'll just echo what Walt said, in that reaching out to your legislator, to your connections, is always a really good thing. And then, read the local news. That's a really good way to keep in touch with big ticket items that are impactful. So yeah, thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Will. It's been so helpful. And Ashley, kind of coming from your perspective, any resources you have or observations on how we can best engage on these?
Oh, wow. I don't think I can add anything new. I use the bill tracker. We're keeping tabs on the different bills that are related to planning, and have in our Microsoft Teams group kind of a channel to talk back and forth about them. One we're kind of concerned about that we haven't talked about yet today is the Property Rights Protection Act, SB 146. That would limit local regulations to things that are pertinent to public health and safety. So we're concerned if that one goes through, that a lot of our zoning and local regulations wouldn't be able to cover items that manage growth. So that's another one we're keeping an eye on. That's what I've got so far. Yeah, I really appreciate all the other resources that folks shared and their ideas and thoughts on the session.
Great, thank you. And Will, there's a question in the chat. You got any news sources that you really like locally for tracking?
Oh, that's a good question. Forward Montana is great. Montana Free Press is great, just kind of generally broad speaking. And then whatever local newspaper, there's Livingston Enterprise, Bozeman Chronicle, Dillon Tribune, no shortage. Next Door is the worst, but sometimes there's good stuff on there to check out or just get a good laugh from. Thank you. Appreciate the
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you all for really taking the time today. It is so appreciated. This was really helpful. And again, I'm just going to invite you, what Lily did, is if you have more resources or things come up, share with this group. We know as a collaborative, we're trying to figure these things out, think thoroughly about them. So your input's appreciated. Thanks for today. Our next monthly update will be, I think I'm looking at the calendar, right? February 25th. Will be almost transmittal by then, so it'll be a whole different world. But Appreciate your time. Have a good rest of your day. And thanks for taking the time to think about this.